Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. Today is the 5th of December, and as always, we encourage you and your family and village to stay up to date on the latest weather conditions around your community. You can do that easily by calling the Alaska Weather Information Line. The number on your screen, 1-800-472-0391, is a free call around any part of Alaska there. Use that number, write it down, and then write the numbers down you use to get your forecast information. It'll go a whole lot faster the next time. Of course, phones work, but if you want to try it online there, the mobile-friendly version of our website is mobile.weather.gov. That loads really fast, and it works really well in a low-bandwidth situation there. So if you don't have a lot of fast internet where you are, try mobile.weather.gov, and then once you type in your village or location, save that page to your home screen, and then it acts just like a weather app that you know and trust from your friends here at the National Weather Service. As always, if you have questions about what you're finding online or can't find what you're looking for, let me know. I'm happy to steer you in the right direction. david.snider@noaa.gov is the easiest way for me to serve you when you have questions about what we do. Now, if you're questioning how cold was it this morning, ooh, yeah. I think Fort Yukon made it down to at least 42 below. Might have even gotten a little colder there in the wee hours of the morning. Really interesting thing happens this time of the year. When you have cloud cover, it keeps you warm. And then even in the middle of the day, when the sun is shining and those clouds move away, it can get colder, which is usually not how things work in just about any other latitude in the world, except for here, where we live, of course. So it is cold. This morning, 8 a.m. temperatures there in Bettles, 23 below. Delta Junction was 15 below. Eagle made it to 31 below. Fort Yukon again 42. Fairbanks area was about 20 below. It hasn't really budged much of the day for most of these locations. Tanana was 33 below. Utqiagvik was about 1 above. Denali National Park almost 20 below. Fort Wainwright 21. Same for Eielson. Kotzebue and Anana also well below zero. And Unalakleet 2 above. Northway was 5 below this morning. And cold's going to keep on coming. Cold's not the problem in northern parts of Southeast. In fact, it's probably going to warm up in the next several hours there as rain moves in from snow, taking over from snow. It looks like winter storm warning will be continuing through at least 9 o'clock tonight. After talking to the forecasters there in Juneau, they're watching that changeover, and it was moving very, very slowly this afternoon, but it hadn't quite made it into northern parts of Southeast. So that meant all this was still falling as snow, and enough so that a winter storm warning was going to continue at least until 9 o'clock. Once that changeover happens, that heavier snowfall there around White Pass probably start to taper off there. So Haines and Skagway still looking at accumulating snow through the end of the evening hours there. Out west, a little bit of a different story. A pretty large Bering Sea storm is slowly creeping eastward. It has a lot of different parts to it, and one of those first initial pieces is moving closer to land tonight. As that happens, winds are going to come up here. This will be into probably tomorrow and then the next 24 hours. So tomorrow afternoon into Saturday, it looks like we're going to see some winds probably in the order of 45 to 55 miles per hour, and it is going to snow. Now, the good news is here in the Yukon Delta, only looking for about 1 to 3 inches of snow. As you move up toward Grayling and areas generally in the lower Yukon Valley, this stretch here is probably looking at about 3 to 5. And then as you get up in toward the Koyukuk Valley in Galena and Ruby, you're probably talking about 4 to 7, 4 to 8 inches of snow there. And again, all of this is going to have a lot of wind, anywhere from about the strongest gusts will be on the order of 55 miles per hour. So there is going to be some poor visibility as that snow is falling, and also then blowing around the snow that's on the ground. So plan on tricky travel conditions here in the Koyukuk and the lower Yukon Valley all the way out toward the Delta and generally north of Hooper Bay. Out across the west, a winter storm watch is posted for the western end of the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island. Wind gusts here during this period tomorrow could certainly stretch into the 60-65 mile an hour range. Not looking for a tremendous amount of snow, but it does look like with the position of that storm just to your south, there you might collect as much as 4 to 7 inches there. But it's going to be the wind that's really the problem. So again, the gusts up to about 65 miles per hour will be possible during that period. So most areas out into the west are going to get some type of weather. Right now we think that's probably going to be the worst of it as it stands heading into the beginning of the weekend. Here's a look at what we see. South wind is working into northern parts of Southeast right now. This is just a very small part of the overall weather that we see in the Gulf, but that low is pretty isolated. The main story is really out here. This is the big stuff. There's several waves. There's a wave of low pressure here, another chunk right here, and another chunk right here. And all of this is going to try and combine into a greater ball of weather that's going to reorganize a little bit more across northern parts of the Bering as we go through the weekend. The overall effect of that is it's going to grab a substantial amount of warm and wet air and move that right back into southwest and south central Alaska, eventually making it to southeast, and really do a number on the temperatures that we see here across west and south central Alaska. And what does that mean for your snow? It's going to suffer. There's no two ways about it. Temperatures here in Anchorage may go up 25 degrees in the next couple days. It is impressive. Meanwhile, don't forget, there is a tremendous amount of cold, and we're talking the bulk of winter's cold so far, sitting here across northern parts of Canada and interior Alaska that we just saw was anywhere from 30 to 40 below. That's not going to go anywhere. It doesn't want to, and it doesn't have to in wintertime. So what happens? We have south winds that move into and try and nudge that away, or it goes up and over. And if that goes up and over in the interior, the light bulb should be going on in your head. Warm and wet air over a lot of cold, deep air. Sure, it's going to warm up some, but if it doesn't, that could mean some mixed precipitation problems here in the interior. Things like freezing rain come to mind. So we're not there yet, but if you're in the interior watching this weather play out as we go through the weekend and early next week, you should be thinking about that and watching the weather changes carefully and planning ahead. Now, out across the west, back to now time here across southwest, low pressure sitting across the outer coast of southwest at 998 millibars. This guy is just starting to spin things up, creating a little bit of snow across Bristol Bay and parts of southwest. This is the big player right now, getting organized, 982 to 984 millibars, and it's deepening. But all of this is going to combine into a more consolidated weather picture here, I think, across the northern Bering in the next 24 to 48 hours. You're going to see some changes. So this is on its way out here across northern parts of the Gulf, and all of this here is really fairly clear. The satellite's deceptive this time of the year. If you've been watching for years, the satellite picture shows the cold. It senses the temperature and then displays what we see as clouds. And the colder it gets, the more clouds it likes to draw on here. And in the summertime, that works really well. In the wintertime, this type of satellite picture isn't horribly helpful, so we'll have to ignore that part. This is what it should probably look a lot more like. There's a lot of clear sky, and of course, you know when it clears out, it gets bone cold out there, bone chilling cold, and that is going to be back again tonight. Now, for parts of southwest, it does look like we'll see some snow in the interior, Lake Iliamna up the western end of the Alaska range, and probably some snow here in south central as well, maybe a couple inches there, nothing too terrible. We start to get into that steady south flow into parts of southwest, the Alaska Peninsula, the eastern chain, and low pressure out here in the west, still driving the entire weather chain. Areas of blowing snow still possible around St. Lawrence Island, Nome, eastern parts of Norton Sound, and also off the Chukchi coast. Clouds will be a little more likely across the north slope, and generally north of the Brooks Range summits. For southeast, it looks like the trend will be toward more a rain-snow mix, if not all rain, for Juneau and points southward, and certainly eventually into Haines and Skagway. As we get into your Friday, here's that low starting to organize, 969 millibar low now. But out ahead of that, a lot of wind moving through and a really steep pressure gradient, not only right here in the vicinity of the low, but all the way up through Kotzebue Sound and into the Chukchi Sea, and then also into far parts of the western Bering Sea and eastern Russia. So it's a very powerful system, not only here at the surface, but aloft. And in the upper levels of the atmosphere is where we really get that steering system that drives everything down here at the surface. And if that's going full tilt, then this has a much easier time to really get the wind going. Across northern parts of the Gulf, we have a little band of mixed precipitation, generally in the northern parts of southeast. I don't think we're going to see accumulating snow in Juneau. Things should start to quiet down as we get into the weekend for southeast. But out west, that low deepens. It's finally gotten its act together. The lower level part of the storm is almost underneath the upper level part of the storm, and that's when things can really get going. And that's what we see here. Strong southerly flow out across west and southwestern Alaska, periods of rain and snow across southwest. But as you go further north, we get into accumulating snow and certainly a lot of wind again. Remember, those wind gusts out across the coast could be on the order of 55 to even 65 miles per hour around St. Lawrence Island. The stronger winds should subside as you go up into the Koyukuk Valley and the upper end or the lower parts of the Yukon Valley. But out across the Delta again is where we're going to see some of those stronger winds. And again, poor visibility, even though we're looking for only 1 to 3 inches of snow and 4 to 7 up toward Ruby and Galena. So a winter storm watch sitting for St. Lawrence Island, periods of rain and snow to your south, rain across the Gulf Coast, heavy rain perhaps around Kodiak, and the weather is going to be really tricky here in South Central. It does look like there will be periods of rain and snow in the region and wind on top of that, so watch for some changes there. And snow spreads into the Brooks Range. We'll see what happens around the Fairbanks area. You're going to get clouds. You're probably going to get temperatures warming up. If any of that precipitation can make it in and over that cold air, that's not going to be so nice. So watch for more. As we look at Friday morning, temps easily 35 to 40 below around Fort Yukon, Fairbanks 11 below. Temps around South Central, teens and 20s, 23 in Homer, one of the warmer spots there. 20s and 30 for Southeast and Utqiagvik, 3 below, 3 above in Nome, 21 around St. Lawrence Island, 32 in St. Paul. The Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula probably looking at temps in the 30s to almost 40 degrees, nearly 40 in Kodiak. High temps there tomorrow, 45. South Central looking at 20s and 30s there, so nudging the freezing point, and above it in Southeast, warming up in Haines and Skagway as well. Fort Yukon 22 below, and we'll see. We'll see if you warm up that much. 1 above in Utqiagvik, 1 above for Kotzebue, 30 for Macoriak and Nunivak Island, I should say, down to 26 Saturday morning, 32 below in Fort Yukon, 11 below in Tanana. Anywhere from 0 to the 20s across the Parks Highway corridor and into the Copper River Valley there, Glen Allen, Golcana, only 2 degrees, 14 below in Northway, 3 below in Eagle, 8 above in Nome. Unalakleet, you're looking at 4, probably looking at temps in the single digits and teens for places like Cooper Bay and Newtok. For the afternoon on Saturday, 10 below. It looks like South Central warms into the mid to upper 30s. Homer almost 40, 46 in Kodiak, near 40 for King Salmon and Dillingham, and Bethel looking at 34 degrees.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to aviation weather now. IFR will start out across the western edge of the Alaska Range into the Killbuck Mountains and out to the west around St. Paul and St. George. You'll start to see some VFR breaks west of Adak all the way out to Shimya. Marginal conditions extend all the way from Lake Iliamna down through the central and eastern chain, Kodiak Island, and the northern parts of southeastern Alaska, with IFR up across the Chilkoot and White Pass region as snow starts to wind down. Across the North Slope, look for marginal conditions to continue there and hints of marginal weather just outside of Kotzebue Sound as you're heading through the Bering Strait into St. Lawrence Island all the way down to St. Matthew, St. Paul, and St. George. IFR is still lingering around Cape Newenham and generally south of Bethel and north and west of Dillingham along that band of snow and all the way out into the central Bering. We'll start to see IFR develop around the Chugach Range and most of Prince William Sound down through the Kenai Fjords and Seward and all the way up the Susitna Valley, generally north of Chignik and also around the Alaska Range. For southeast, look for improving conditions across northern parts of the Panhandle and widespread VFR across most of the Yukon Valley, most of the Koyukuk Valley, and maybe even parts of the upper Kuskokwim. That'll come to an end as we get into Saturday morning with IFR continuing to build in from the west. Look for IFR through the Yukon Delta into the southern parts of the Kuskokwim Delta, all the way around the Alaska Range, the Chugach Mountains, and east into the Wrangell St. Elias. And MVFR lingers across the northern passes there out of southeast. Most of southeast should be okay. Most of the Gulf will be socked in with marginal conditions, and most of Kodiak Island will start to move in that direction. The North Slope still looking at marginal conditions there, and out west, VFR for most of the chain in the Alaska Peninsula. As we get into the afternoon, some of that will kind of build back in with marginal weather. Look for IFR developing around the Kenai Peninsula, the northern and western entrances for the Alaska Range. IFR also across some of the higher terrain into northern parts of southeast with marginal conditions elsewhere and more parts of the Kenai Peninsula, including Portage Pass and probably areas up toward Girdwood. Central sections of southeast all the way down to Port Alexander, probably looking at marginal weather as well. Your pass conditions then look like this. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass look okay. VFR conditions should prevail as we go through Friday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see IFR throughout the day. Same goes for Rainy Pass, probably looking at some snow there. And for Windy Pass, leaning over toward marginal weather as we go. Isabel Pass looking at some improvement as we get into your Friday afternoon. Mentasta probably holding at marginal weather through most of the day. Tanita Pass looking at marginal weather as we go. Portage Pass probably moves into IFR and stays there through a good chunk of your Friday, and then we'll see that kind of move in and out a little bit as we get into Saturday. Maybe. There's a good chance it'll hold at IFR. Chilkoot and White Pass will probably lift a little bit toward marginal as we get into the afternoon tomorrow. As far as freezing levels go, levels are around 2,000 to 6,000 feet here across southwestern Alaska. The surface freezing line stretches from St. Matthew all the way out toward the west and then takes a jog down toward Kodiak Island, hugs the northern and eastern Gulf Coast, and then across southern parts of southeast and see freezing levels all the way down to 2,000 to even 4,000 feet. The warm air surge is going to move eastward as we go through the weekend, so plan for some changes there. Icing potential right now is at low levels across northern parts of southeast and the northern Gulf, and then those levels rise a little bit as you get out toward the west coast and take another tumble as you get out toward St. Lawrence Island, St. Matthew, and Nunivak Island. As far as threats of icing go, this is generally isolated moderate across northern parts of southeast, Kenai Peninsula up through the Alaska Range and even the Tanana Valley, and across southwest, the YK Delta, St. Paul, St. George, and the eastern chain between 5,000 and about 9,000 feet. The jet stream right now points to a southerly flow that's picking up across the west coast. Right now, wind speeds at 30,000 feet are running between 130 and 140 knots with high pressure sitting out over the Gulf. Wind speeds moving out of Alaska and tapping into the cold that's over the upper Yukon, sending that to the Pacific Northwest. That's on a 50 to 90 knot wind from the northwest, and low pressure continues to hold out across the western Bering Sea. At 9,000 feet, you can see that steady southerly flow anywhere from 10 to 50 knots across the interior and the west, over Kodiak Island as well. A stronger southerly flow also building out a little bit ahead of that into Prince William Sound with 40 knots from the south. Light winds across the northern interior and the Brooks Range, those start to bend in from the north and east, and at 3,000 feet, you can see that south and easterly flow pushing off of the interior anywhere from 20 to about 50 knots with low pressure lined up across the Bering and another system developing just south of Unalaska Dutch Harbor and Cold Bay and Falls Pass. High pressure sitting across the eastern Gulf also generally giving southeast a little bit of an offshore flow for most of the central and southern parts of the archipelago. And again, a southerly breeze continues across most of the Gulf and running right up the Alcan border. So as far as turbulence goes, Friday seems like an in-between day. The storm system out west is still organizing a little bit more, so turbulence may wane before it comes back into the weekend. Watch for considerable moderate in southwest.
Sometimes it's helpful to know what phase the moon will be in next week, and rather than going to the internet, just remember this little trick. Light on the right, the moon's gonna get bright. Light on the left, actually there's not a great rhyme for that one. As the moon orbits the Earth, it transitions through phases caused by the constant light of the sun. First, it waxes or gets brighter, and then it wanes or gets darker. Right now we're heading into the full moon, so the moon is waxing or getting more lit. It takes the moon about a month to orbit the Earth, so every week it goes a quarter of the way around. From new moon, it waxes to first quarter. Watch the light. Then a week after that, we get the full moon, then it gets darker, waning to the third quarter, and finally back to the new moon. Pay attention to where the light shines on the moon, and you will always know what phase we're in and where we're going while you keep looking up.
Star colors.
Our closest star, the Sun, is, of course, a miasma of incandescent plasma, superheated gas shining out into our solar system and beyond. If an extraterrestrial being looked up at their night sky and spotted our star, they'd see a little white speck. But Trace, you might be thinking, the Sun, it's sometimes yellow or orange or red. And this is true, lovely viewer. The Sun can appear to be those colors, but that's mainly an illusion due to our atmosphere. Astronauts see the Sun as a bright white source of our heat and light. When you look up at the night sky, it's hard to miss all those white specks of starlight. But if you look closer, you'll notice that not all the stars are white. Some are red, some are orange, yellow, and even blue. Because of Orion's position in the night sky, it's one of the most loved winter constellations, although it can be visible early in the morning at other times of year too. Regardless, the next time you look at the Hunter, look closely at the two brightest stars, and you'll notice the top left one, his right shoulder, that's red. That's Betelgeuse, a dying red giant star. It's cooler than our sun, which means it burns redder. Red giants are stars that are nearing the ends of their lives. At that point, they start to expand and cool off. Betelgeuse varies between 500 and 900 times larger than our star. If it were sitting where our sun is now, we'd be inside of its surface. But tucking back out to all of Orion, shift to the bottom right side of the constellation, Orion's left foot, that's Rigel. And if you look really closely, you'll notice It's blue. Rigel is a blue supergiant star and one of the brightest in the night sky. It's 70 times larger in diameter and 40,000 times brighter and twice as hot as our own sun. If we were orbiting Rigel at the same distance as we do our sun, we would burn up. To have comfortable temperatures like we do now, we'd have to be 5 times further away from Rigel than Pluto is from the sun now. That is so far. Star colors aren't arbitrary. The color of a star has to do with what it's burning and its surface temperature. Cooler stars are redder, hotter stars are bluer. And this is the opposite of how your faucets work at home because fire. Instead, think about the flame of a Bunsen burner in science class. Blue flames are the hottest, while the red flames are cooler. Our white sun, for example, shines at about 6,000 Kelvin, but red Betelgeuse is a cool 3,000 Kelvin, and blue Rigel is a spicy 11,000 Kelvin. The closer you look at the sky, the more colors you're going to see. Look for Spica, Vega, Alpheratz, and Bellatrix for the blue stars, and remember that means they're hotter. Then look for Merak, Antares, Aldebaran, and Arcturus for spectacular red stars, and remember, those are cooler. Stars are incredible things, and there are many reasons to be captivated by them other than their shine. Just like living things, stars are born, they age, they have complex lives, and eventually they die. But throughout their lives, they are all varied and unique. Colors are one of many characteristics astronomers can use to learn more about these incredible, massive balls of fusion. And now you have one more tool in your astronomical tool belt while you keep looking up.
And now, marine weather around Alaska. Back with your marine weather now and a look at the sea ice edge. No big changes out here across the Beaufort, but we can see continued expansion out across some of the coastal areas. Of course, the challenge is a lot of the warm air that's running north and a lot of the strong winds will be moving some of this out. We may see some open areas there across the upper ends of the sound and closer to the coast as we go ahead in time. But for right now, ice is getting fairly close to Little Diomede and areas out to the west through the Bering Strait. We're seeing some new ice growth around St. Lawrence Island, both the north and the south side, but especially the south side. And we're beginning to see some new ice, some marginal ice here across the upper end of Cook Inlet there on the Susitna Delta area. So some new changes there. And again, with all the warm weather coming in, watch for more changes to come. All of this anytime you want, weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. Friday's forecast in southeast, it looks like we may get into a little bit of a north wind there, 10 knots, 2-foot seas, a stronger northerly flow coming down the inside passage, 15 to 20, looking for 3 to 4-foot seas there. Southerlies coming up the outer coast with a stronger south and easterly flow, 20 to 25, and 6 to 7-foot seas there for Friday. Coming up a little bit more on Saturday, 20 to 25, looking for 6, 7, even 8-foot seas as you head out toward Prince William Sound. Winds across southeast, generally light for now, 10 to 15 knots it looks like, and about 7 to 8-foot seas across the outer coast. A northerly wind picks up in the Lynn Canal, 15 knots, and 3-foot seas there, otherwise 2-foot seas on the inside. For south central and inside Prince William Sound, a northeasterly flow at 25 knots, 4-foot seas there. North and easterly winds coming down Cook Inlet, 20 to as strong as 35 knots. West of the Barrens, 11-foot seas expected. There's 6-foot seas on the eastern side and a broad easterly flow sweeping into the Kenai Fjords and across the Gulf at about 7 to 8 feet. As with seas there. On Saturday, a south and easterly flow anywhere from 25 to 35 knots, 13-foot seas expected in the region, 7-foot seas inside of Prince William Sound on a 30-knot wind and 20 to 30-knot winds across Cook Inlet with the strongest there west of the Barrens as usual, 30 knots and a 10-foot sea on Saturday. In Bristol Bay, looking at 40 knots and a southeasterly flow with 8-foot seas there, 7-foot seas down the coast as winds are switching around to more of a west and southwesterly direction. Look for a 20 to 30-knot wind across Kodiak waters and all the way out towards Sand Point with a 13 to as high as 17-foot sea there. By Friday afternoon, inside of Shelikof Strait, 20 knots from the east with a 6-foot sea becoming southerly at 25 on Saturday with south and westerlies building in. Winds will go southerly inside of Bristol Bay, 40 knots and 9-foot seas there, 14-foot seas down the coast, and you can see much stronger winds and higher seas out to your west and away from the shoreline for now. For Friday across the chain, 25 to 30 knots there, the highest seas on the south side, anywhere from 15 to 17-foot seas there, 18 to 19-foot seas in the west, on that 30-knot wind coming in. Looks like 25 to 30 knots generally north of the Aleutians and along the Bering Sea coast. You can see the higher winds are spreading eastward, and here's the Pribilofs for reference. Out to the west, though, the next weather system that's working into the region already starting to crank things up to storm force at least. 25 to 30 knots, it looks like 20 to 25-foot seas with a west and southwesterly flow working in. 20 to 25 knots should do the trick for most of the central and eastern chain as well, with seas holding at 14 to 16 on the Pacific side and 8 to 9 across the Bering Sea coast as we get into Saturday. North and easterly winds for the west coast. Looks like 40 to 45 knots as we go from Nunivak Island out towards St. Matthew and the Pribilofs. 25 knots from the southwest with a 10-foot sea, 12-foot seas across the Kuskokwim Delta, and 30 knots over the ice for Norton Sound. That becomes stronger as we get into Saturday. 45 to 50 knots. They're looking at storm force winds in the region. Northeasterlies around St. Matthew with a 21-foot sea. Southwesterlies around the Pribilofs with a 13-foot sea, and southerlies coming into the Yukon Delta. Generally around the Kuskokwim Delta up toward the Yukon Delta, you'll see seas anywhere from 13 to 19 feet. Again, across coastal areas there. So watch for more information as that storm gets closer. A light wind, let's say, a north wind around the Beaufort, 10 to 15 over the ice. A stronger wind across the Chukchi, 20 to 25, generally from the east and northeast with a 5 to 6 foot sea. For Saturday, winds come up to 40 to 45 around the Chukchi coast, 8 to 11 foot seas there, and winds around the Beaufort come up to about 25 knots. All that for Saturday over the ice. Recapping tonight's weather, a winter storm warning continues for the Haines and Skagway areas. Snow is falling, will continue to accumulate as we head through the evening hours, but warmer weather is on the way, and that will gradually turn into rain. It looks like that'll happen late this evening. Out across the west, winter weather advisories for the Yukon Delta and up the river there into the lower Yukon Valley, places like Grayling, and then heading up to Koyukuk into Galena and Ruby with a winter weather advisory there. Your issues will be lighter amounts of snow closer to the coast, heavier amounts of snow in toward Galena and Ruby, but the wind is going to be a problem. As you see there, a strong area of low pressure gets closer and closer as we get into Friday and Saturday. Accumulating snow, not a big problem, but the blowing snow, the winds could be up to 55 to 65 miles per hour.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.